Woods from Memmott, North Carolina, and you are listening to The Candid Frame.
When I think about what made Polaroid so magical, I don't believe it was just the speed by which I saw an image. We have much quicker results with a digital camera, and I can't say that I experienced the same feelings of anticipation, glee, and surprise as when I used my family's SX70 camera. Willem Baptist's film Instant Dreams explores the emotions and the spirit that made the experience of using Polaroid film such a unique and creative one. He does so by challenging our expectations of a traditional documentary and infuses his film with visual flourishes more often associated with fictional films and television. He wants us to think of Polaroid not just as a product, but to remember and value it for the experience it provided.
Maybe you remember the days of writing to your pen pals, or to a loved one or a vacation love. Just writing, you have the experience of writing the letter, the anticipation of getting a letter. Has he read it? Has he read it? What is he going to say? And then reading the text, waiting by the mailbox or whatever. So there's a whole set of experiences that goes into making a Polaroid photo.
The reason why Polaroid and films of its type continue to fascinate both young and old has nothing to do with how flawless the images are. It's not that Polaroids are perfect in any technical way. To the contrary, it's their perfect imperfection that help make those images so unique and special.
We all experience life. We all know the imperfections of our own lives. You can find that in those images. To me, the Polaroids are almost like mirrors, right? You look at them, maybe you see your own imperfections, but you also see your own dreams. You see a fuzzy image of whatever photo you took, and you can see the most dreamlike fantasy come to life. Or maybe you took a photo of this woman on the beach and she looks more beautiful than you would have made it with a digital camera. I don't know. There's a lot of place with your mind. This is an extension of ourselves.
We'll talk to Willem about what inspired him to make this film and some of the wonderful human experiences he witnessed while making it. This is Ibarionex, and welcome back to The Candid Frame. But I'm looking forward to talking with you, so thank you for making time with me and staying up late.
Well, thank you for having me.
Let's get started with talking to you about your first experience with a Polaroid. I remember mine, with I think it was an XX70, which I just loved to use. But when did you first experience making a photograph with that kind of camera?
Well, I didn't make a photo with a SX70 because I didn't have the money then. Mm-hmm. But my first experience with a Polaroid would be, I was maybe 14 years old, and I found a camera at this flea market, and I didn't know what it was. I had no idea. I know it was a camera, but how do you turn it on? Where are the batteries, right? Mm-hmm. So I had to a camera shop, and they told me, yeah, you can't buy film for this anymore. But he had film in the back, and he said, it's very old, and I tried it. And I started making photos with it. And it was like black and white, and the colors were very off. But I really remember that magical feeling where you put the cassette in the camera and the whole camera comes alive. So that's a memory that's still with me. And then taking the pictures were horrible. They were out of focus. But still, there are two things. One, I kept on making photos. I had 6 packs. It was so addictive. And secondly, I felt very proud of the photos I took. I think it was maybe the first time I felt like an artist.
Oh, yeah.
And it was long before I went to art school and all that stuff. But for me, it was a real, I wouldn't say I was proud, but it was like an empowering feeling. Like I made this.
Yeah, I mean,
You know?
I completely get it. That's one of the experiences I had, and I think a lot of people had with the Polaroid. It was unlike the cameras of the day where you would load a film into the camera and then you drop it off at the processor, and there would be this, delay between actually taking the picture and seeing it. This is way before the age of digital.
Yeah.
And Polaroid gave you that experience, that immediate experience of seeing the photograph, and also seeing it develop in something that wasn't possible unless you had like your own photo lab, your own dark room. Yeah. And so I think part of that, of actually experiencing that in your hand, is one of the appeals of the camera, beyond simply being sort of an instant way of getting a print from it.
Yeah. And to be honest, it's very addictive also, because I remember doing research for this film. So I bought like 10 packs of Polaroid film, the new one by Polaroid Originals.
Yeah.
This was for research, and I told my wife what it cost. So it's like $20 a pack, 10 packs, that's $250. And my wife said, "You're crazy. We have to buy groceries, You cannot spend $250 on this." And then I gave her the camera, and she took a couple of pictures. The next thing she said, "Can we buy some more?"
Yeah, it's very different from shooting digital. Even though digital, you get to see it, there's nothing tangible beyond the camera itself.
True.
So, in your experience and with the people that you talked to for the film, was that a big part of the allure?
Yeah, I would say. Well, people have different attachment to the photograph. So I have an artist in the movie, and for her, it's like she films her dreams, her visions. Her photos is the closest things that come to her subconscious creative mind, I would say. With the scientist, it's a totally different story. For him, it's like the mystery of the chemicals. It was actually pretty funny, because when I was researching it, I went to all the scientists and said, "I want to know why is there so much appeal for this old kind of photography?" And I went into this board room meeting kind of setup, and there were like, I would say 10 scientists and 3 CEO kind of business type people. And they were all sitting with their arms crossed. And I said, "Yeah, I want to ask you guys some questions." And they said, No. We're making this stuff, but we want to ask you some questions, because we're not that far along in the process and people are still buying it. So we don't know how to make it. What do people want? Do people want like a perfect image or not? Because we can try to make it, but how do you make like the imperfect, perfect image, right? So for them, it was like they were like looking at it as scientists. But it's very hard to quantify, like, what is a Polaroid photo? What are the colors? Then, lastly, I would say for Christopher, who is like a writer, who is in the movie, for him, it's like the social aspect that's very attractive to him, like socializing.
And that's one of the things that Edwin Land, the creator of the Polaroid, often talked about, this idea that photography in the form of this particular camera was a way of sort of engaging people and getting them to share photographs. And he was sort of prescient in terms of what's sort of happening now. But to a certain degree, the Polaroid provides a more personal way of sharing a photograph in a more intimate way, just because it's the only photograph. And if you give it to someone, they have the only copy, whereas today you put it on Instagram and the whole world has access to those images. And so in some ways, it's not as a unique experience as the Polaroid was. Mm-hmm. And that seems to be part of the spirit of you were sort of conveying in your film, is that the uniqueness of the camera is beyond the sort of the chemical and the chemicals that made up the film and the dynamics of the camera. It was the socialization that the camera provided seems to be really at the heart of what you were trying to express in the film.
Yes. Well, I compare it with, people say it's outdated or it's not as sharp. But would you say that like Going on vacation, going into the forest with your GPS and watching your phone is the same experience as getting lost. You know, the feeling of getting lost. Or let's say, maybe you remember like the days of writing to your pen pals, you know, or to a loved one or a vacation love. Just writing, you have the experience of writing the letter, the anticipation of getting a letter. Has he read it? Has he read it? What is he going to say? Yeah. And then reading the text, waiting by the mailbox or whatever. So there's a whole set of experiences that goes into making a Polaroid photo. The social aspect is one of it. The magical process is another. The experience of looking at a photo, remembering the scene, because you had a lot of time thinking about all those things. Yeah, so a lot goes into making a Polaroid photo, I would say.
Yeah. One of the concepts that's brought up is this idea of Japanese concept of wabi-sabi.
Yeah.
Where the beauty comes from the very imperfection, not from it being perfect and ideal. And
yes.
it made me realize that to extent that decline and the disappearance of Polaroid as a business, as a film, sort of gave the Polaroid camera a second life in that people were using expired film, which results in unpredictable outcomes, unpredictable results with respect to the imagery. Where when it was, a product, it was always about trying to get good color, good exposure. They still was trying to achieve a certain degree of perfection. But with the demise of Polaroid, all of a sudden the camera and the film were being used and experienced in completely different ways. And I think that very imperfection has been seen as a wonderful creative outlet that you can't get from a digital camera where every pixel is, for the most part, accurately capturing what's in front of the camera. And that's something that I think that not only the people that you interviewed, but I think the whole sense of the film was about there's something being lost in this pursuit of trying to make a perfect camera. Was that an idea that was pretty clear to you from the very beginning, or did you discover that as a result of the process of making the film?
No, that was really clear to me because I read this article. Well, there are a couple examples I can give you what triggered me. One was an article I read, a scientific article. I think the headline of that article was, "We see with our emotions and not with our eyes." Because it turns out that every image you see, 80% of it is formed in your brain. And we have imperfect brains. We like to connect the dots.
Right.
So that's one part of it. Another part is a simple experience I had. It's like, maybe you remember those Instagram filters. They were very popular.
Yes.
I had them too. So one day, and maybe you know this feeling, you go to a party and you make some photos on your iPhone, right, to put on Facebook or Instagram, because we all want to, convey our successful lives, and then you look at your photos on your iPhone and you look, shit. Can I say shit? I don't know.
It's okay.
But okay, so this isn't a party I went to. Not in my mind. In my mind, it was far more exciting. I cannot show this to my friends. So what you do is then you take the perfect image, you throw a filter on it, which degrades the image. And then we have a feeling with this degraded image, this feels more like the reality I want to experience, or I experienced. So it's like, for some reason, we experience real things more via ways of distorted reality, of imperfect reality. That's how we're hardwired, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that for me, that was really important to get into the film. Not by explaining it, but maybe like taking you on a trip and having you experience that same feeling by watching the movie. That was my intent, at least.
Yeah, because at first I went in expecting it to be a more straightforward documentary where it's about the history of Polaroid and William Land and the Impossible Project. And then it takes on, it includes elements of, fictional filmmaking. And at times it strikes me like a tone poem
True.
So it's very it's really sort of an interesting sort of experience once you sort of accept the fact that this is not going to be what you expect in terms of a normal documentary. So when you came up with the idea of the film, was that your intent from the very beginning, or was this part of an evolution?
Well, you bring up some very interesting stuff because, well, it was my intent for sure, because I have a reasoning for it. If you want facts and information, you can just look it up on Wikipedia. So I didn't feel obliged to give more information than in the film. Secondly, the movie is really about the essence of why Polaroids resonate. And the only way to convey that, in my mind, is by having you experience that. So that's very important. To be honest, I didn't really expect that a part of the audience would feel like expecting something else. And maybe I would have said, if I look at, for instance, the reviews of the movie, which are like, I would say, like 2/3 is positive, but it's also always 1/3 of like reviewers or people who watch the movie who get a little bit angry at me because they say, yes, but you promised me a movie about Polaroid, a documentary about Polaroids. And then I say, well, first of all, I didn't promise that at all. It's not really, well, the information is there, there's facts, but I will say it like this. Would people say when watching Jaws, the movie Jaws, and say, well, I thought, Jaws was a pretty good movie, but I really would have liked more information about marine biology and how sharks function. So I looked at it a bit like that way. Polaroid, I explain a lot about the history, about the artists, about how it all works. But to make it like a standard journalistic documentary, to me, it was boring. There are a load of books written about Edwin Land, but nothing about the essence of Dr. Land. There's a lot of stuff about fans and digital culture, but nothing about the essence of it. So for me, it was getting to the core of it by being poetic, if that makes any sense.
Well, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, and I think that's where the sort of the heart of the film is for me, is the whole idea of just the experience of it.
True.
And once I gave myself permission to experience it in that way rather than the other way, it was really I really felt I was really engaged with what I was experiencing, what I was seeing on the screen. So I really enjoyed that part of it.
That's excellent.
And you know what it was? It allowed me to interpret the film in my own way, which I don't think a lot of documentaries often do, because they want to be in complete control of the narrative and the eventual outcome. So it's really kind of interesting to see you sort of take that sort of tangent where you let the viewer sort of experience it, as well as learning information about Edwin Land, Polaroid, and its use today.
Well, first of all, thank you for experiencing the movie like that. That makes me very happy. But I will say this. For this movie, I've had I get a lot of fan mail, and there were a couple of angry emails I got from people who were expecting like a journalistic, dry, typical run-and-gun style documentary. Out of the 3 people who sent me an angry email, which isn't a lot, 2 of them emailed me back like a half year later, because the movie premiered in 2017 in the Netherlands, saying I watched it again because it was on VOD in the Netherlands. And then I watched it with my family, and now I understand. But sometimes things take a little bit time. But in all honesty, it isn't like an experimental movie or something. I would say it's more like a midnight movie about Polaroids. So it's because now it sounds very like heavy and arty, and I don't think it is very heavy. I think it's also very lighthearted at some moments, and it isn't full of very complicated science in that sense. So it can be fun too.
Yeah, you profile several different people. One was Stephen Herchen, who's part of the Impossible Project, which at the time of the film, they were trying to rediscover the formula for Polaroid because the inventor, Edward Land, kept it secret. So when he died, the formula was was gone, so there was no one there to be able to reproduce it. And then you have Stephanie Schneider, who is a fine artist who has been using Polaroid, a variety of different Polaroid films to create fine art. And you have the author of a biography on Polaroid. And they all sort of approach the use and the history of Polaroid in very different ways. In terms of who you chose to include in the film and how you wanted to include their experiences in the film, can you give us sort of an idea? Because I've talked to documentary filmmakers before, and what's often been the case is they have an intent going in, but as a result of making the film, it takes on a life of its own, and they sort of discover the structure, the spine of it as a result. And I'm wondering how your filming and interviewing these people helped the film to take shape in the way that it did.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, like the kind of movies I make are pretty structured from the beginning. I'm not saying that like the structure of how I tell the story, but I had a very clear idea about having characters in a movie that represented all the human emotions that go into making the photos. So there's the artist side, there's the science side, there's the history side, because that is a Polaroid. All those things are like jumbled together. So I really wanted to present all these sides. So I didn't, in the research, I searched for a lot of let's say artists. I maybe searched for 100 artists, and then I maybe visited 3 or 4. And in the end, I ended up with Stephanie, because for me, she was the perfect embodiment of the dreamlike. She's living in this dreamlike Polaroid world in the desert, and so her life looks like a Polaroid. With Stephen, he made big sacrifices. Leaving his well, he didn't leave his wife behind, but he was on pension. He didn't have to work. He has a very nice wife, family in Boston, but he travels to Düsseldorf, Germany, to work on this formula, and he eats alone. So there's a very, very big sacrifice to make. You have to have I would say, you can compare it if it's like an assignment of God or something, they're on a mission, something that's bigger than life.
That was actually one of my favorite parts of the film, getting to see what he was willing to sacrifice and give up in pursuit of making this film, because you show them at various times, struggling with trying to get a formula right and getting the image to look fairly decent. And, the environment that they're in is fairly sparse to start with. It's kind of like a lab, to all intents and purposes. And then you see him.
It's like 1984.
Yeah, and then you see him at the restaurant, at the hotel, and talking to his wife, and it was just like it gave me a really sense, a real personal sense of the extent that people go through in order to achieve something that's important to them. And I think in a more straightforward documentary, probably would have spent a lot of time in the lab with the guys, going through the various formulas, and that would have been the spine of it. But I liked the fact that I saw with both Stephanie and I forget the name of the author who wrote the book on Polaroid. Christopher. That personal sense, his relationship with his son, for example, and how for each of them there was a connection to the process and to the camera that went beyond just making a nice picture. You could see in their lives, in all 3 of these people's lives, how integral the Polaroid, the creation of the images was. And I think that that's something that's often missing from digital, despite the fact that it's immediate. I think that's again, we're kind of repeating myself a little bit, but I think that's really at the heart of what has always made Polaroid an instant film sort of a magical part of a person's life. But I imagine that how, the struggle for you, though, is how much of that do you keep in the film and how much do you have to sort of leave out? So tell me about the challenge in terms of figuring out the balance of, the more straightforward elements of the documentary and the sort of more esoteric approaches that you took for the film.
Yeah, well, you're right. It was very difficult because you have 4 people with complete lives. And then you have a very technical and story about the recreation of the Polaroid. So I have 90 minutes to tell my story. So it was hard. Mm-hmm. But for me, it was like, okay, so I have to establish their formal relationship with Polaroid. And as I already said, it's like they have to represent a certain side or aspect of the Polaroid making. And then each person also has a function. A function, I would say, like Christopher, the writer, because he's a writer, he's very useful to tell the history part. And Stephanie, the artist, besides her own personal attachments, she's very good at not only showing the artistic side, but explaining how the wabi-sabi, an image is only perfect when it's imperfect, to show that. Because she's also imperfect herself. She had an accident with disfigured part of her leg. And then I would say in the case of Stephen, for me, it was important not to show all stages of the formula or how it worked. Only what the essence is. Mm-hmm. But what was important for me was like focus on the sacrifice, but also taking in, for example, religion. Or I found out that he wrote poems, very short haiku. Mm-hmm. That I actually didn't know. I found out during filming.
Okay.
And there were like a relationship between writing haikus and making Polaroids, which I found totally fascinating. And it turned out he was a religious man as well, which plays part in like this chemical being he created, which he says is the most complex organic man-made thing ever made, almost like a living creature. So he plays God in a way, and I really like to play with those symbolisms. Yeah, but what I left out, the hardest thing was, I would say there were more connections. Like Stephanie, one of the artists that started Polaroid again, who bought up the old factory in Holland. So in 2008, Polaroid went bankrupt. Everything was sold. A lot of factories were demolished. And one of the artists, or a group of artists, bought the last remaining Polaroid factory in Holland. And they tried to make Polaroid film again. And one of those artists was very much influenced by Stephen Schneider. But I just couldn't get that in the movie because it was just too much. And so there were more of those kind of things I had to choose between. But for me, it was like almost on a subconscious level, because I knew, let's for example take Christopher the writer. I knew I really wanted to have that feeling of the old Polaroid commercials, with all the happy families,
yes.
But there was also always something about those perfect families in the commercials that was like, it's like they were too happy, I was always very suspicious of it, And Steven Spielberg made his career about families with TV dinners and the imperfect families and all this stuff. And I saw it with him too, because he's a busy guy. He has 2 jobs, a typical New Yorker. So he has to juggle it all and have a family. And then he has this passion and he writes books. And so when I heard he takes a picture of his son every day, I thought, okay, I saw like this connection with him, with the commercials, or just with family life. We all experience life. We all know the imperfections of our own lives. You can find that in those images. To me, the Polaroids are almost like mirrors, right?
Yeah.
You look in them and you see your own imperfections, but you also see your own dreams. You see a fuzzy image of whatever photo you took, and you can see the most like dreamlike fantasy come to life, or maybe you took a photo of this woman on the beach and she looks more beautiful than you would have made it with a digital camera. I don't know. There's a lot of plays with your mind. This is an extension of ourselves.
To be the voice that introduces the episode like Eric Woods did this week, just send us an audio file recorded on your phone, tablet, or computer, saying something like, "This is Owen Meany from Gravesend, New Hampshire, and this is The Candid Frame." Say it at least a couple of times so we have a take to choose from, and include 3 to 4 seconds of silence with your voice to help us clean up the audio. Also, make sure to include a link to your website, blog, or Instagram feed when you send it to info@thecandidframe.com.
Help The Candid Frame to continue bringing you great conversations with some of the world's best photographers. You can do this by supporting our Patreon effort by committing as little as $5 or more a month. When you do this, you not only help us to meet the cost of production, but provide us the time and resources we need to bring you conversations you won't hear anywhere else. Sign up today by visiting patreon.com/The Candid Frame. Thank you.
For me, one of the more sort of, I guess, spiritual, I don't know if that's the right word, but I thought about this for the longest time in terms of the creation of just traditional film photography and the Polaroid. This idea that, light reflected off of something and then went through the lens and made contact with the negative, and in this case, the actual physical print. And when I think about the great moments, the great images that were made, it's like, that photograph of Winston Churchill, or the moment that Oswald was shot being taken out of that Dallas police station. The image that Neil Armstrong made on the moon, light hit that and then hit the surface of the material. There was a direct physical connection between those two things. And when I see the print or I see the negative, it's like there's that interlinking that with digital isn't there. And I know it's a really kind of weird way to think of photography, but for me, that's just like, this is a connection to a time that has just totally disappeared. But there's something just physically magical about it that I just love to think about. And I wish that digital sort of retained that. And I know, in terms of the photograph, it may not make much of a difference to much of anyone, but I think that's always been something that I've always sort of loved about sort of traditional photography. Mm-hmm. There's no question beyond that. I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, well, actually, it's right in many ways. And besides, like, the experience you have with taking photographs, it's like when you have a Polaroid, that light that actually reflected off the subject is in that photograph. Mm-hmm. And most likely, that's what Christopher tells me. These aren't like my own original thoughts, but he said, so the light reflected and hit that surface and is captured in that photo. But most likely a Polaroid was held by the one who was being photographed.
Yeah.
So every Polaroid, because that's what happened. People take a Polaroid of you and you take it, you look at it, because that's what the photo invites you to do. So any Polaroid you see, most likely the subject has held it in his hands. So it's a real memento, or a real artifact of time.
The scene where Christopher is at the party, sitting on a couch, and people are just sitting with him, and he's making their I thought that was such a wonderful scene.
Oh, thanks so much.
I really enjoyed that, because I always like watching photographers work, but I was just mesmerized by the casualness of it, but the sort of intimacy that he was able to have with each person that sat down with him. Because if he'd had a DSLR or a mirrorless camera or with a camera phone, that experience would have been completely different. There, people were not only willing to be photographed, but they were wanting to engage with him and he with them in a way that I don't think would have existed had he been using any other medium to capture a photograph. And I'm wondering, as you were observing that and filming that, what experience did you have witnessing that?
Well, I was very glad to have captured that, because it was so awesome. Well, for listeners who don't really know what we're talking about, you have to understand Christopher is like a real, how would I say, he's like a book nerd. So he's like this, he isn't like a real player or something. He even isn't really, well, he's sociable, but he's not the guy you would expect to lure in a lot of women or something like that at a party. So the funny thing is, we tested, before we shot that scene, we shot a day with him in, I think it was in Brooklyn. And we asked him, can you take pictures of tourists? And he really hated that, being sociable with people he didn't know, especially in front of the camera.
Yeah.
But it slowly built up his confidence. So the next day we shot at a party, and he was really reluctant because he doesn't feel, for him it felt awkward to be at a party, to invite a film crew. But I really trusted it because I saw it the day before. I saw him grew in, like, I would say, he turned more manly, but it's not, it's my lack of better words in English, but I would say more confidence.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. He gained a mojo, he was like, so I was really confident about that. So when I was at the party, I saw a couch and some beers in front, and I just planted the camera there, and I just knew if he would sit down there with his camera, things would start happening. And it did. It did. In the beginning, he's a little bit shy and making awkward jokes about his camera. But in the end, he's a smooth talking guy to the women. You see him flick photographs if it's nothing. So it's a transformation of this little bit timid writer going to this full-fledged player. To my eyes, it was like that, and I'm not doing him right by saying this, but maybe I'm how would I say? In my mind, it's bigger, but he grew, and he grew in happiness and confidence, and the whole room reacted to him. So for me, I was happy for him, but also happy to see that all the theories of Dr. Land about how we connect to each other were true.
Yeah.
It wasn't in my artist's mind, I'm going to make a movie of this. No, it was true. I saw it. And there was magic. And I'm very glad Christopher helped me prove that.
Yeah, because in my own experience of making photographs at parties, there's a sort of distance that's created normally. I mean, you pose people, you make a photograph, and you're not necessarily connected to them. I was kind of a shy person. It was a way of me sort of keeping my distance. Yeah. And I could take a picture, people would pose and they would smile, and then I would just sort of move around the room and have a drink or get something to eat. But I really didn't have to sort of engage anyone. But what I saw there is really indicative of a lot of the experiences that you have when you shoot with an instant camera, is that people are really curious to see, and that sort of just breaks the ice, and you're able to engage in a way. And that really was at the heart of what Edwin Land imagined for it, because he wanted to do more than just, create an interesting technology that could make a lot of money. He really was trying to be, he was very aware of the role that photography played in a social construct.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
That clip that you have from The Long Walk, where he talks about this idea of a camera that could fit, it would be the size of a wallet that could fit into your pocket, where you could take a picture and it would spit out a print. I don't know if you had been aware about that initially, but that was just a gem in terms of him sort of being prescient in terms of a digital camera.
Yeah, well, he predicted the future years ago. And in that sense, the technical side is pretty interesting, as, he made an invention that we still cannot reinvent. So that's interesting. But, he wanted to make an invention to make mankind better and to give us the best aspect of being connected. And all his predictions came true.
Did you find that in the making of the film that you yourself had a greater or a different appreciation for what he had made?
Well, yeah. Let me think. That's a good question. Well, no. I did have because before I made this movie, I didn't know so much about him. I didn't know how influential he was, or how a genius this guy was. Because of course he was the Steve Jobs of his day, and when I talk about him, not a lot of people know him, which is a shame, to be honest. He was one of the greatest inventors of the last decades, or how do you say it, last decennium.
Yeah, the last.
And so what it did for me was it helped me to view social media or maybe even the way I use my iPhone, or in a different way. Because, nowadays we take so much photos. My daughter that just turned, she's like almost 4. And I have a whole, like loads of hard drives full of photos. I never look at those photos. They're on hard drives, which is crazy. Mm-hmm. This is totally crazy. And that's what we're doing right now. Because, let's say you go on a holiday and you shoot like 300 photos nowadays, right? In the old days, you just shot like maybe in half a roll. And those memories you kept and remembered. So we're shooting information right now, not experiences, no memories. At least most people. I don't print any photos nowadays. And so investigating Lance and researching him and learning about his vision for mankind really made me appreciate like the memories I had of photographs, and made me think about what it is to photograph things. For what reason am I capturing something? Sometimes I think now, with so many photos on hard drives, I'm just capturing something for people, like, I don't know, to look at when I'm dead or something, because I have no time to search all those photos and look, select them all. They're too many.
Yeah, there's something to be said for a print, because I discovered a photograph of my mother a couple of weeks ago. She just had it pinned to her board, and it was an image I can't remember having seen, and it was her probably younger than I am now, probably in her 40s, and she's in the kitchen with one of her best friends, and it was just like, "What's this?" And I grabbed it off the board, and you won't have that experience with a digital, because if you don't have access to that computer or that hard drive or that thing, that stuff is gone. And I think there's something to be said for, just being able to find those things. Because I have a Polaroid that I probably shot when I was 13 or 14 that is on my mother's bedroom of her sister, and my cousin. And I remember using the SX70, being in our yard, making the photograph, hearing the sound of the mechanism, that image being spit out. And that very print is right there in my mom's bedroom. And that's something that you don't get with digital. So I think that as much as the film isn't about sort of the history of photography or land, I think it really strikes at the heart of what made that whole process special.
Well, that's what I hope that people will take out of it. It's a shame, and I would say that nowadays, I have some hope with young people, because actually the guy who did like the location sound for this film, he has a daughter as well, and his daughter, I think she just turned 14, and she asked her dad for her birthday 2 things. One was like a typewriter. Like an old-fashioned typewriter.
Yeah, very good. I like that. I like her already.
And the second thing was like a landline telephone. With the circle dial. Oh my God. What I mean?
Yeah.
And so, why did she want a telephone? To have like real conversations with her girlfriends. So, you can say it's crazy or whatever. But I find it very interesting that we're yearning back for those feelings, and young people understand it. Because a lot of people who buy this instant film nowadays, while it's still expensive, are young people. So they're not willing to buy, music or a CD, which is like $10, but they're willing to buy like a pack of film for $20 that holds 8 photos. So that's saying a lot, and it's over. Have you ever seen those grocery stores, with the vegan meals and stuff, with all those nice handwritten fonts that make you feel good? So we're all searching for experiences, and we're searching for authenticity, because everything is so, prefab made. Even fashion magazines, they make photos and they put in Photoshop this like Polaroid border around it, just to make you feel this is real stuff. This has some emotion. So I'm not sure where I was going, but I
know what you just said, because really that's it. That's about having an authentic experience, something that's real. That's one of the reasons why so many people get into photography, is to capture something authentic, because I see plenty of images that are perfectly crafted, and I don't feel anything. And then I see a picture that I know that in a photo club would get torn apart that I just love. I don't care that it's slightly out of focus or the exposure's off or the composition is perfect. There's just something about how the person captured it that just moves me, that gets me excited. Perfection is overrated.
Well, you know what they said about like the porn industry. They wanted to introduce like 4K porn, and all the models of all the porn actresses like protested because then they can see me how I really look. It would be the death of the porn industry.
So how has the experience of making this film and this whole idea of wabi sabi that was explored in it sort of colored the way that you are looking at your films that you're making subsequently?
To be honest, not that different, because when I started making films, my first films out of film school, and this was already in the time that digital was like in. But my first films I did on film, on celluloid, like 60 millimeter film. I make films from the love of cinema itself. And for me, film always had this like mysterious quality. It's very hard to define because it isn't better or sharper, but it has this, I don't know, this something. So that aspect I'm always like searching for in the way I make movies. It doesn't have to be like the images have to be imperfect, but I'm searching for that, that sense of magic and mystery. And that could be, filming something that's, beneath the surface. That's very hard to like put your finger on and say, oh, it's this or this. Mm-hmm. Or just like this movie, Or it could be like in the composition of things. I sometimes like to, I would say, mess with people's minds sometimes. So, I would say it influenced me or is still influencing me in that way. And I really like a good mystery. So
that's great. Well, my last question that I ask each guest is I ask them to recommend another photographer, or in your case, it could be another filmmaker that you want to have our listeners explore. And it can be anyone, someone you've long admired or someone you've recently discovered. So who would that one person be and why?
Oh, I should really have prepared for this question. Can I just say what my top 3 favorite movies are?
Sure. Yeah, that's fine.
It's not actually top 3 of my favorite movies, but I think movies everybody should see at least would be, at least they're the films that inspired me, even as a photographer, because I studied photography. That would be the movie Le Mépris from Jean-Luc Godard. Okay. This is like his most beautiful shot film, which stars Brigitte Bardot. The second movie would be, I think, The Holy Mountain by Alexandro Jodorowsky. This is like a real midnight movie. One of the guys of the Beatles produced it, I think, because the images are very esoteric, and the story is sometimes incomprehensible, but still beautiful. And I think as third would be Tarkovsky's Stalker. So that are my favorite movies. Yeah.
Well, I like those recommendations.
Yeah, those are movies that partly exist or ask the viewer to put in something of themselves, to dream with the images, to dream with the filmmaker, make your own movie. I like that kind of images. If it's a photographer or a movie maker or maybe even a painting or a novel. I just read, I'm not kidding, I'm just reading a lot of Charles Bukowski. Mm-hmm. It's the same with him, his writing. It's not so much what's on the page, it's what's not on the page.
Very true. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed speaking with you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks to Willem for sharing his time and story with us. You can find out more about him and his work by visiting willembaptiste.nl. The film is currently being screened at film festivals, Find out more about screening dates by visiting the Instant Dream presence on Facebook at facebook.com/instantdreams.movie. To hear and see me talk about my personal photographic process, visit the TCF YouTube channel, where I offer comments of photography submitted by TCF listeners who contribute to the Candid Frame Flickr poll. Check out the TCF Flickr poll and our YouTube channel by clicking on the link in the show notes and the website. My recent book, Making Photographs, Developing a Personal Visual Workflow, is now available. Purchase it today and receive 40% off the list price when you order it from the Rocky Nook website. Use the promo code Perello40 at checkout to take advantage of the discount. And receive 3 free copies of my previously published ebooks by signing up for the Candid Frame mailing list, where I share thoughts about life, photography, and keep you updated on TCF events. If you enjoy the show, help to spread the word by writing a review wherever you find and listen to podcasts. And if you write a review on a blog post, let me know and send me a link because I would really love to thank you on air. You can also support the show by making a monthly contribution through Patreon, or you can make a one-time contribution via PayPal. You'll find the links for both in the show notes and the website. Thanks to Jane Duckett and Nate Danforth for their recent contributions. I can't thank you enough. And if you want to easily access every episode of The Candid Frame, download the Candid Frame app. It's available for both Apple iOS and Android, and it's free. And if you scroll down on the app, you'll find a free excerpt of my book there to download. And we also have an Alexa app, so if you have one of those smart devices, download the skill and listen to the show that way. We're everywhere. The Candid Frame's audio engineer is Martin Taylor, who you can find at theothermartintaylor.com. The show's senior producer is Cynthia Parker, and our music is from Kevin MacLeod, whose royalty-free music can be found at incompetech.com. And this is Ibarionex, and this is The Candid Frame.